I have a choice mom friend who said that she had an open adoption, and one of the things she said was that it's better to have a child who is loved by many, many people. She says it doesn't have to just be me. It doesn't have to be me and a co-parent. It doesn't have to be me and just 3 people. It's like we do want our kids intentionally to be part of a village.
An estimated 40% of households in the U.S. do not have a father. This includes a mix of circumstances like divorce, but today we're talking about families created by single women on purpose. Our guest, Mikki Morrissette, is a single mom by choice, and through sharing her own story, her website, her podcast, and her book titled Choosing Single Motherhood, The Thinking Woman's Guide, has become a resource for women planning to start a family on their own. Mikki, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Something that is important is defining exactly what is a choice mom.
Yeah, at the time when I embarked on my own journey, the term tended to be single mother by choice. But, the fact of the matter is we're not choosing to be single mothers. We're choosing to be mothers. So when I was setting about writing my book, I thought, let's put the emphasis where it is, and that's about choosing motherhood. So I came up with the term choice moms.
In the book, you say a choice mom is someone who proactively seeks to become a nurturing mother on her own.
There's a lot of similarities, certainly, no matter what way you become a single parent, in terms of logistics and finances and things like that, raising kids on your own. But there is certainly a different kind of mindset to the woman that finds herself at a certain age, either deciding that this is something she has to do or deciding this is just what she wants to do.
How did you make that decision to start your family in that way?
Yeah, it wasn't too dissimilar, I think, from a lot of women. And I did do at least 25 workshops around the country, so I got familiar with a lot of different people's stories. And in my case, I was married at 25, decided fairly early on it was not the right fit for me, but early 30s, we divorced. We're still good friends. And then as I reached my mid-30s and I was doing well professionally, I lived in New York City, I was doing decent financially, I realized that I was not certainly the type that was going to try to rush into another relationship that was long-term in order to have kids. But I did feel financially and emotionally secure. And like a lot of women that I did meet over the years in different cities, I was just ready to be a mom, and I wasn't about to serial date to speed up the process, which I did not think was a good idea. But I also wasn't going to deny myself the opportunity to have kids just because the timing was off.
What are some of the unique challenges to being a single mom by choice?
Financially, things change a lot. In my case, after I had my child, I did not want to go back to the high-paid job where I was working, 50, 60 hours a week. It was no longer a priority for me. So I did downsize my career, and that meant I also wasn't making enough money. So that became more of a challenge. I think a lot of women face that. There's also a lot of women who are teachers and social workers and other things who are not necessarily making a lot of money when they start. So I think financially it's a lot. That's a big challenge. A lot of parents, even when they're married, struggle financially. In our case, too, we don't have child support. We don't have a second earner paying a mortgage, et cetera, et cetera. So that can be one of the biggest challenges. Like I said, a lot of things changed for me. Priority-wise, I was living in New York City in the publishing world, and after 9/11 happened when I was there, I just decided, well, I don't want to raise my daughter here anymore. I'd been there 18 years, didn't expect it until I became a mom, decided I'm going to go back home to Minnesota, where I actually then was able to have a second child. So a lot of things shift. You think you plan and you figure out how much money do I need, where am I going to live, all this stuff. But things continue to change after you become a mom, and some of those things don't seem as important anymore as you thought they would.
What are some things that you really thought through to have ready to make that final decision, like, okay, I'm going to do it now?
I wanted to use a known donor. So I had looked at anonymous donor sperm. I had considered adoption. I have a brother who was adopted, did not love the fact that he did not know anything about his biological origins. I realized that was pretty important to me, which is also why I kind of weeded out the anonymous donor sperm if I had an option to do otherwise. So I did, in my case, have to figure out what I would do if I was using a known donor. Who would I be asking? What would we have to talk about? What would I have to know? For me, I felt I was one that was lucky in that I felt pretty confident. I was pretty independent and self-sufficient for a long time. I was not looking for a partner to do this with. So for me, that made it a lot easier. Some women would have preferred to do it with a partner, and that can be pretty hard.
I'd love to talk about choosing a donor. You have some amazing stories and sort of warning stories or danger stories from people who have chosen donor sperm, because a lot of times my patients are saying, listen, I want to know who this is or the genetics or a little bit more about the family. You know, I have this friend that I would just love to use that sperm. It seems like it's going to be fast and easy and less expensive. One of the stories that you shared in your book about the woman who chose a friend who said, I absolutely don't want to be involved in child rearing. Just here's my sperm, no strings attached. And then as soon as there was a baby, absolutely changed his mind.
Yeah, in fact, there's several people I've met with that kind of story. I know people that have gone through terrible court cases. It's not a clear-cut thing. Even if you have it written down that the person was deciding they weren't going to be a parent, if they decide they will, oftentimes the court still thinks it's better for the child to have two parents. So it's not guaranteed. It is something that can be very much underestimated. And like you said, people think, oh, this is a much easier solution. You just have to go into it with the fact that this very much might change. And it has to be somebody that you are at least connected with enough that you can navigate some of those ups and downs. I know now, having interviewed a lot of people, that I was very lucky.
It can also flip the other way. Like you shared stories about how single moms went into some financial difficulties and then have sued their known donor for child support. So it's for all parties to be protected and have clear understanding.
You are nonetheless, you are having a child with someone, whether they're going to be a co-parent or not. And that's a very important relationship for all people concerned. And so, yeah, you still have to go in with your eyes open to make sure that this is the person that you kind of trust to navigate that process with you. I have a choice mom friend who said that she had an open adoption, and one of the things she said was that it's better to have a child who is loved by many, many people. She says it doesn't have to just be me. It doesn't have to be me and a co-parent. It doesn't have to be me and just 3 people. It's like we do want our kids intentionally to be part of a village. And in her case, she and her son have had a great relationship with the birth mother, who was actually just here. Our boys are the same age, who was just here for her son's high school graduation. To be able to work that out, to navigate, again, a lot of it is about communication. It's about being very intentional. We make these choices for a reason, and we owe it to our kids as well as everybody else involved in the birth to try to navigate that as best as we can with all the people who could be important to our kids' lives.
Are there benefits to being a single mom by choice I think in general people think about, oh, it's non-traditional, so we got to think about all the negative things. But what are the benefits?
I love the fact that my kids and I have very conscious conversations about things. It starts from that really early age of like, what makes a parent? What is a parent? We call our donor the bio dad because it indicates he's something more than a sperm donor, but he's also not like a dad or a parent. So we, at a very early age, we're sort of talking about things like that. And then that spirit can carry forth. We're very conscious of why we have people in our lives. There's a hierarchy when you're in a 2-parent household, I think. And it's a different kind of setup when you're one parent and one child, or two children in my case, you become part of decision making together. One of the stories I love is when I was driving my daughter somewhere. She was 7. She was in the back seat. And she says, I know that, you ponder these things sometimes. And she says, I know that men go to sperm banks to donate sperm, but I don't know how they get the sperm out. And so there's things like that kind of come up, and they, because they think about these things. They know that things happened in a slightly different way. In my case, my kids both know their conception day, and whether they like it or not, I acknowledge conception day for them because I knew exactly the day they were conceived. So there's
cool.
things like that. I know they can be embarrassed about it, but it's also one of those things that, a lot of kids don't actually know that, and it's kind of unique. In the case of my son, he had visited for one of the first times in elementary school, spent a whole day with a friend and his friend's father. And then he got in the car and he immediately said, I wish I had a father. And of course I froze, because that's the question, that you're prepared to be able to answer or talk about at some point, but it never comes with stepping stones. It just happened. He just got in the car and said it. It was just a very natural question for him to have asked, or a wish for him to have expressed. He had been surprised when he was talking to his friends who were like, who is your dad? And he says, well, he lives in New York and I've never met him. And they were like, what? So all he wanted to be able to do is, what he did is he went up to him, they shook hands, and then my son went off and played at the playground. He didn't have any burning questions or anything. He just wanted to be able to say he met this guy who was his bio dad. It's led to a lot of other conversations and things. And it's just, again, I love this aspect of the relationship I have with my kids. What ultimately happened, I actually, after that, matched him up in the Big Brother, Big Sister program. He has actually had a big brother. We just celebrated it's been 9 years. He's been matched with a great guy, and they did together do all kinds of, they did all the sports stuff that my son really loved doing and I was not doing with him, going to baseball games, going to a lot of different things, riding bikes, et cetera, et cetera. So he did have that kind of relationship with a big brother, and it was a great program, a great match.
A benefit to being a single mom by choice is being able to pick the village that is being surrounded. You often hear that saying, well, you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. And it sounds like you can even more easily choose your village and choose the mentors and the people that are helping your children and molding your children in even a different way. Looking back on the way that you built your family, and I know it's been 18 to 23 years, anything that you would have done differently? If someone comes to you today in 2022 and says, I would like to be a single mom by choice, is there anything that you would say, hey, listen from my mistakes, or I'm so glad I did it this way?
One simple but important thing I learned, again in hindsight, I had the bio dad's name put on the birth certificates because I thought that would be important. But what that ends up meaning logistically is that every time they need to renew their passports, you have to get the person's permission, because if you're taking a child out of the country, I did not know this, if you're taking the child out of the country as a single parent, you have to have the other person acknowledge that it's okay. In terms of anything else, regrets-wise, I think one of the biggest things, since I did these workshops around the country, and I'm sure in your work you know this, a lot of women do spend a lot of time getting prepared, thinking about what they need to have in place before they do this, thinking about how much money they need to have in the bank. But at the same time, your fertility does not last forever. And sometimes you end up underestimating both how much it might cost and how much time it might take. And I do know a lot of people that were incredibly sad about the fact that, well, there's also miscarriages that are very difficult for people to deal with when they don't have a partner. There's women who have had to go back into work after a miscarriage when nobody knew that they were even trying to conceive. There's a lot of that kind of loneliness and isolation, which is why it is very important to have community around. It's important to be able to connect with women in your community because it is a lonely process. It's a scary process. There's times, especially for me, that first trimester of pregnancy, you can just really get afraid. And sometimes there's financial things, you lose your job. It's really important to figure out who you can turn to. And at one of my workshops, a woman came who had been raped and had become pregnant from that. And she was in her late 30s, and she was tussling with the trauma of trying to figure out at this stage in her life, was this her only chance to have a child? Could she do it? It's tough. I don't know what she ended up choosing, but she came to the workshop to be surrounded by other women that were making these choices. There was another woman who was in one state. She came to a workshop I held in a different state because she was afraid she would be known in the other place where she had a large position, I guess, in the community, because she didn't want other people to know how much she was grieving the fact that in her case she was in her late 40s, and she knew that it was probably not at all likely that she could have a child, and she just needed to cry about that with women that might understand. I know another woman that came to a workshop. She had just had a miscarriage that morning, drove an hour to come to the workshop. She says, I'm not sure if it was the right choice to make, but I just needed to be here to grieve. And so I think it's also important to recognize that whether you're proactively doing this or not, there's a lot of emotions involved with it. And especially if you're having fertility issues, if there's a whole bunch of different things. So it's not an easy choice, but I think, looking back, I don't know anybody that's regretted the choice that they made.
There really is no perfect time to have a baby. And sometimes my patients do opt to freeze their eggs. That is an option that is relatively new in the fertility world, or create embryos with donor sperm and just give them a little bit more time to prepare. And so that's an option that was probably not around when you were building your family, but it's something that I talk about on a regular basis.
And I know that the technology gets better. There's only sometimes also so much you can do. It's also, as you know, I'm sure you have talked to people about this, it's not foolproof. Just because you're using technology, medical technology, laboratory, it doesn't mean it's going to happen. And I know everybody can be very optimistic, but yeah, there can be some downsides. Again, that's why it's really important to have the tribe that you have picked for yourself who can support you.
I would love to go over some common myths and misconceptions about single moms by choice. One of the first ones that I thought of is, I think it's a misconception that it's rare. In the 1980s and 90s, maybe it was pretty rare for a single woman to be a mom by choice. But I remember Murphy Brown episode 1992 watching when she delivered her baby as a single mom.
I had my daughter in 1999, so it was some years after it, and I can't say that at the time it wasn't something that made me think, oh, I'm going to do that. It was not, but I do definitely remember it. I do definitely remember the debate. I think it did make it more in the consciousness of, frankly, the vice president bringing it into the conversation in a different way made more people kind of think about it, and the fact that this maybe was a new choice. I do know women who have said they wish that they had had that choice earlier in their life because they ended up being in marriages that were not right, or with people that did not want to have children, or people who were not prepared to be a parent. So having that option of, again, being able to proactively decide how to bring a child into the world is, again, I think we've got amazing choices now.
I just think that it's just a misconception that it's unusual or rare. And having other people in the spotlight do it, I can think of Sandra Bullock and Charlize Theron, Madonna. So many people in the public eye have chosen to have families in this way. And another misconception is that these are women that just can't find a man. You know, that everybody who becomes a single mom by choice would much rather be partnered, have a father in the child's life, and that obviously this person just couldn't find somebody, so they finally settled on doing it on their own. Is that true?
No. I would say some people certainly wish that they were doing it with a partner, but they weren't going to settle in order to make that happen. I know that from the workshops I had, half of the people there were very excited about the fact that this was a choice they could make. Half wished that they could have a family with somebody, wanted to share that experience with somebody. These tend to be women who don't want to settle for somebody that's not quite right to be a father for the kids.
That also ties into the misconception that this choice is anti-men, that in a negative way, that all women who choose this don't want to have men in their life. Is that true?
No. And one of my stories there is Bill O'Reilly, when he had a radio show. They were vetting me to be on the show after I wrote my book. But in the vetting process, it became clear that they wanted me on the show to be able to say that men are irrelevant. And I was not going to say that. I don't believe that at all. Most of my friends are men. I started off as a sports writer, was certainly surrounded by men, and have lots of wonderful friendships with men. So no, it's not that we feel that men are irrelevant at all. It's just that when it's time for us to build a family, it's time for us to build a family.
And an assumption and a misconception is that if you do become a single mom, that it's going to be harder for you to find a man. Is that true?
I know a lot of choice moms who have married, and sometimes a few years, sometimes 10 years after the fact. I do know that the dating process for women changes considerably after you have your child, because you're no longer looking for a baby father. You're now looking to see how do they interact with the child, the person that's the most important to you, and you can weed out people very quickly that way, and you can also embrace them completely when you see how they do that. So it changes the way that you date.
You talk a lot in your book just about there are some women that get in this pattern of sort of serial dating and basically looking for a partner who is going to be a father and focusing on, okay, how long, the biological clock, all right, how long are we going to date and then marry and then have a baby, and they're just looking for that baby daddy. Whereas because they're nervous that they won't be able to find that partner after they have their child, and that you have lots of examples of women who went ahead and made the choice that motherhood was the right choice for them, and that did not close the door on finding a partner in the future. And I just really appreciated those examples. Okay, misconception I'd like you to answer. Children need a traditional household with a male and female role in order to be psychologically stable.
I know that at some point when I was traveling around a lot for workshops, I realized that I was leaving my kids at times with lesbian couples, with other choice moms, with very non-traditional families, completely by accident. A lot of people also who had kids later in life, I tended to find that, my kids' friends seemed to have parents that were also later when they had kids. And so it's interesting to see and be able to recognize the variety of families that are out there. When my kids got older, because they didn't see me in a long-term, lifelong relationship, that it was going to somehow impact their own ability to have relationships. One thing that I learned in the book process that somebody said that really struck with me is that the relationship they had with their then grown choice child is really the way that our kids learn that dynamic of how to be trusted, how to have open conversation. It wasn't necessarily being able to watch other people, their parents, in a relationship.
The data really supports its love, it is stability, it's strong relationships, it's the village. It doesn't have to be built in a certain way that society has told us that is normal, in air quotes.
I knew when I was having my daughter, I remember telling a friend that I wanted to be able to show her all of the different ways that you can enjoy life, different ways of being. And then, of course, I evolved as a parent, as we all do. And, it was after my son, when he was 3, and I was working from home, and he said, I want to go out and play. It was such a nice day. And I was like, I'm too busy, because I was trying to make ends meet again. And I realized that's exactly not what I wanted to be doing as a parent. So I learned how to get much more balanced. I have a much easier life having had my children than I would have without them, which again feels ironic to say, being a single mom, but it was a much more relaxing lifestyle for me than I think I would have had otherwise, just working my big job.
A common question I get from patients, and I'd love to learn how you talk to other moms about this, is how do I answer the question, who is my dad?
The biggest thing that we all talk about is the fact that you just have to be honest and know that there's not one time you're going to answer that question. It's going to grow and it's going to evolve as the child gets older, has different questions. At some point, they'll go years where it doesn't even cross their mind. At other times, it's going to take on a different impact, have a different angle to it. It's an evolving conversation. And again, I think it's one of those things where we can be very consciously engaged with our kids, and we're all the better for it. Bit by bit, it's one of those ways that you develop a bond with your kids, by talking about how they came to be and how you came to be part of their life.
The data really does support that honesty and open conversations as young as kids are able to talk about it is the way to go. And there are incredible children's books that my patients have shown me and that I've passed on to other patients.
There's so many people that go into who we are, and to be able to pass on that kind of knowledge to your kids and be able to recognize how we connect with each other, why we're important to each other, why people that you don't always have an ongoing relationship are still important to who you are. Sometimes it's even strangers that have a big impact, and that's, again, we're all interconnected, and I feel like this is one of those ways we can really help our kids and help ourselves be mindful of that.
When my patients have made the decision and they're ready to start trying, they worry so much about telling loved ones and friends and the reaction that others might have and the judgmental comments that they might get. Any advice on how to talk about this with people that might have very different worldviews?
There's certainly been a lot of acceptance about this choice over time, but that's certainly not universal. I know a lot of choice moms, one whose parents were very religious, and they were never going to come around. They never did, apparently. So that's heartbreaking. But I also know how women have gone into this with such a resoluteness that, again, you find your family, you find people that do support you. I know in my own case, it wasn't so much my first child, but I was afraid to tell my mother in particular that I was having a second one, because I knew that she was worried about me financially. That was just one of the things she worries about. And so I knew that was a harder part of, like, how was I going to actually raise 2 kids on my own? And so I know I was a lot more nervous about that. Certainly she was concerned about it, but also, she's been one of the best supporters. She and my dad have been tremendous, and my kids have benefited a lot from being connected to them. So I'm very grateful for the fact that we happen to have that kind of openness. But yeah, I was still nervous.
You had some really great advice at one point in your book, kind of going through different ways that you can handle people that disagree with your own life choice, because you could feel great about building a family on your own, but you're going to come across people that have snide remarks or just have different worldviews. And you kind of talked about, you can arm yourself with facts, like all the data around how well balanced the kids are, the studies that have come out. You could be patient and kind of listen to their concerns, make sure that they are heard, walk through their concerns and address them. And you could kind of come to a mutual agreement to disagree, or you talked about just fighting endlessly, just you could choose that, or you could choose honestly to walk away. Sometimes it's just best to not have toxic people in your life, and it's sometimes the harder thing to do, but in the long run it can be the right thing.
I mean, we have to make those choices for so many different things. We certainly have a lot of things as a country and as in communities to disagree about, and it's all a process of figuring out the way to disagree together or to let some people go if you need to.
Mikki, thank you so much for being here today. I absolutely enjoyed learning from you and chatting with you. How can people find you?
I created choicemoms.org many years ago. Have a lot of stories there of some podcast episodes, a variety of other things, some guides that go into more details on things. It's wonderful to have people like yourself who are out there trying to give people the support that they need and the sense that they're not alone, because there's a lot of people struggling with these questions all the time. So yes, I welcome people to visit choicemoms.org and find articles there that relate to all sorts of different questions.
Thank you, Mikki. Thank you for being here today. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Mikki Morrissette as much as I did. She reminded me about how important family is built around love, and that family can be built in many different ways. I'm your host, Dr. Lora Shahine, and this is Baby or Bust. If you like this episode, let us know. Give us a 5-star review and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. Baby or Bust is produced by Mark Ramsey, Jamie Solis, and Greg Moga. Executive produced by Paul Anderson for Workhouse Media. Baby or Bust is a Mark Ramsey media production.